Hello, and welcome to the webinar. This is the moment for diagnostics. I'm Bruce Carlson. I'm the publisher of Eye on IVD. It's a newsletter. You can get it on LinkedIn. There's no charge for that. We have some other products as well. Rob LaCroix is joining me. He is the executive director of LTC LLC. Both of us were speakers at the recent Executive War College in New Orleans. That's run by Dark Daly, also an excellent laboratory industry and laboratory management newsletter. We're not officially part of that, but we were speakers at the convention. We took away such a massive information from that event. We were looking for some type of output for it. Maybe we do a slide deck or some type of white paper for you, and decided the only way to explain what we think has been unveiled there and at other places is to have a webinar indeed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We talk about the value proposition of IVD, the new potential business that labs might be sitting on, and also because it's so prominent in the news today, and we know it's been slightly reduced, but it's still an issue. We're going to talk about tariff risks and maybe ways laboratories can avoid those risks. A lot of it, and I can't say this without giving a little plug to the Executive War College. I recommend you go visit their site, the Dark Daily site, and also all the speeches that were had in New Orleans just last month are available for sale, and I highly recommend that you get some of those sessions you might be interested in. In the meantime, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ion IVD. And one of the things we do is market research reports. And our market research report that we have out right now is Artificial Intelligence in IVD Markets. It's one report that can cover all of the artificial intelligence in IVD that's going on. And the thing about the Ion IVD report is that we update it at least 2 times a year with major developments. This is true of all the reports that we work with. Our partner that we work with on reports constantly updates reports. So it's not so much, when was this report published, but it's constantly updated as there's always new companies and new considerations in the marketplace. And you're going to see market segmentation by type, geography, disease, and also a thorough investigation of AI companies and their offerings. It's available at www.ionivd.com. Talk to us if you're interested in that. And with this, Rob and I are going to jump right into the webinar. And I wanted to start with the discussion of IVD's value proposition. IVD is the shining star of healthcare. But do we always know it? Do we always promote clinical diagnostics well in total as a total thing? And that's one of the things, Rob, you can take it from there, I believe.
Right. Thanks, Bruce. It's great to be here. I really enjoyed the EWC. It was my first one. I was honored to be a panelist along 3 real industry heavyweights, Bruce Carlson, Bob McGonigal, and Larry Warden. I still kind of think my invitation was just addressed to occupant or current resident, but it was a great show, and there was a lot to digest over I think I did 12 sessions, and I know Bruce probably did just about that many too, all these sessions, and kind of come up with some of our insights from the big takeaways from it. And this is what this webinar is. And of course, the first one is value. And this slide was actually a slide in our panel. We had this up there, and it did definitely garner a lot of attention because of the 75X gorilla on the slide and how I came about it. And quite frankly, after the meeting, I had quite a few people ask me about it, and a few even challenged me. So I'm going to kind of go into how I came up with it.
Well, let's start with the premise.
rationale is.
Let's start with what it is.
Yeah. So what it is we're looking at national healthcare expenditure and how much IVD is a part of that, and then the broad, um, well-worn quote, utilized in 70% of medical decisions. Okay, so what is national health expenditure based on? It's based on medical decisions that qualified medical practitioners submit versus EMN coding, evaluation and management coding, for reimbursement. That's what opens up the spigot to what in 2003 was $4.9 trillion. There is not a insurer nor governmental agency that will pay one penny without having that submission via the coding from a doctor. So um, that's where the basis of this comes. Now, part and parcel with that is the utilized in 70% of medical decisions. Well, that's been around for a long time. In fact, it was actually first mentioned by Dr. Rodney Forsman from the Mayo Clinic in 1996. So it's almost 30 years on that. So I was challenged on this, and I had to think about it. I've been in the market for 20 years, and I can remember the first time I heard it. It was back in 2005. It was at a supplier forum for DPC, who about a year later were purchased by Siemens. And the DPC's president, Doug Olson, stood up and spoke to all the suppliers. And at that time, I was working for a supplier. And I remember 2 points he made that day. The first is he held up his cell phone right here and stated that this was the future of diagnostics and alluded to the medical tricorder. Now, I'm one to make predictions in this industry, and I do not think that you're going to have this device scan my arm and tell me my testosterone levels or my amylase levels anytime in my lifetime. And that could
Hmm.
actually be another webinar. But the second thing he said was about the 70%. And he said back at that time, IVD was about 5% of the cost and involved in 60 to 70% of clinical decisions. And I actually turned and looked at my colleague who was with me, and he's a friend and my mentor, John Cronin. And I asked him, what's up with that? And he explained that it was attributed to a doctor at the Mayo Clinic back in the mid 90s. And I didn't give it a second thought. So about a week later, John comes up with a copy of Clinical Chemistry Magazine. And there's the article. And I read the article, and I noticed that it was an internal analysis that Dr. Rodney Forsman had done. And because it was a Mayo Clinic, it had weight. It was an internal thing, and
Hmm.
it became widely accepted over the next decade. But there wasn't an actual study conducted, an independent study, until 2015, and that was by Rohr and a bunch of others, and it actually pegged the number at 66%.
Right, which
So
for
that's where the 70% comes in. So now let's roll it back. How do I get 75x
Mhm.
ROI? Okay, if you take in 2023 $4.9 trillion and factor in what IVD cost, we spent on IVD in 2023, which is 44.5 billion, and you divide the two, that actually only comes up to 0.9%. So I'll round up to one. So IVD is really 1% of net was 1% of national healthcare spend in 2023. Okay, but national healthcare spending is all based on medical decisions, and IVD is utilized in 70% of medical decisions. So 70% of 4.9 trillion is 3.4 trillion and some change. If you take that and divide that by the 44.5 billion, you come out with 75.3. I rounded it down to 75x. And that's where the 75x return on investment comes, because it's utilized in all those medical decisions. So $1 returns 75 in 2023.
So I wanted to jump on that point, and I won't take long, but just to show the importance. So what we're talking about here is that the 70% of medical decisions is a good stat, oft repeated by all of our associations. There was a time that people were challenging it. There were even some journal articles challenging it. Where's the proof kind of thing? And then the surveys pretty much dispense with that 66% is close enough to 70 that physicians, and it's also kind of ground truth if you ask the average physician or whatever. It jives. It's not something they're seriously going to challenge. That's great, but it's not enough for the world out there. There's a bigger stat needed, and we probably need five more of these stats and can probably get it. Like for instance, I'll just throw it out. Like uh, Diagnostics total is responsible for this many hospital days saved. Someone can calculate that. IVD is so good at doing this for their individual instruments, but as an industry as a whole, it's something that we have to practice better because all of the challenges that we saw at the Executive War College and we've seen all along, consolidation, budgets, cuts, more recent cuts to VA, possible cuts to Medicaid, um, PAMA, and everything else, comes from a place of labs being seen as a commodity and not as a driver.
Yeah, and really, I think about it. That's our next challenge. If you've been in the industry a while, pre-COVID, the general public really didn't know. It had no connection to IVD. When I'd be asked, "Hey, what do you do?" If you'd meet somebody, "Oh yeah, I work in the diagnostics industry." They take a blood sample, and you'd see their glazed look happen in their eyes, and they're probably thinking to themselves, "Man, I'd rather watch paint dry than listen about this industry because this is boring." But COVID actually elevated the industry and it showed what we did, and to help people as an industry on a unified front, putting our resource together. And we did great. And more recently, I think the industry was also on a unified front, more internally focused on LDTs, our response there. So what I'm hoping for is that our next challenge as an industry is that we get the word out because you know, we need to end that diagnostics is an afterthought commodity that needs to be cost controlled to eliminate waste. We're the 1% that helps the 70%, right? But you wouldn't know it. We need to get the word out. It should be known, it should be accepted that we are the shining star of healthcare and that we can tell a person what's going on inside of them even before they get sick. Who else can do that? And we do that every day. I'm not making hyperbole here. We do that. So I'm hoping that, over time, with a focus that from doctors and their professional associations in the industry, from the hospitals, the labs, the OEMs, and the trade group, and even, an odd consultant or two, that
Mm-hmm.
we start to get the word out on what diagnostics
I mean,
already
and
provide.
I don't think, speaking for myself, how this manifests, I don't think you ever have to get to full pharma, and nor can this industry afford it, where there's a motive television advertising on every test. There might be some larger tests and industries that can do that, but it's a public relations campaign that's better needed. It's the existing outlets that we have shifting focus. If you're fighting the battle in DC, that's good and we must do it. But remember, that's the battle of last resort. That means the public relations battle has not been fought. The other thing I'd say is look at our friends in the pharma industry, much larger industry, but facing an awful problem right now from an industry perspective in that pricing's being challenged. And you don't want, it's urgent right now not to have the eyes pointed at pharma to also be pointed at our industry and to get into a momentum, a governmental momentum of further cuts because they're cutting pharma. Let's cut all spending. And so it's there's no better time than for IVD to do it now and for clinical laboratories to do it now. I'll jump to the next. I think we covered this one. You want to go to tariffs?
Yes.
Okay, so tariffs, as the slide says, we're somewhat safeguarded because laboratories are U.S. based, and someone might say we have contracts to manage cost and reimbursement, no tariff risk. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, and this is kind of, tariffs were definitely on the agenda at EWC, but talking to people one to one, you know, they were like, there was a kind of a level of confidence being U.S.
Hmm.
based, you know, and and as we would talk, I'd say, well, those instruments, they have component risk, and you have a lot of stuff that's service based. You know, there's the per test consumable, which is reagents, but then there's the service consumables, and those are really at risk because there's content there that comes in from China. It doesn't matter where the instrument comes from, or the instrument comes from Europe, and those have risk, especially for suppliers. And a lot of labs don't make a connection to the supplier. They're just dealing with the OEMs that they have the contracts with, right? Or the distributors that they have the contracts with. But it's really the suppliers. And most suppliers in this industry are not large companies. The Siemens, the Roches, the Abbotts of the world are multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. Their suppliers are mostly small. And one OEM can be a significant part of their business. So they have risk. Because if the price goes up 145% across the shipment that they're expected to come in, they can't readily absorb it. And it's very difficult for them to quickly push back on the OEM to say, hey, we're getting a much higher price than we were contracted. We need to raise our price, and we can because of the contract. The OEM might say no. So it's an issue. And if you think of one thing about these last 100 days, today the tariffs are lower. But the lesson is there's no guarantee that they won't change again. It's really uncertain. And when you take into account supplier size and that the industry is basically a just-in-time industry on inventory, they don't hold a lot of inventory, that can be an issue. And for labs, you really have to have an understanding with that with all your vendors that, yes, they have the stuff on the shelf that you're going to need so that you can keep your instruments running.
Let's talk about contracts and clauses.
Yeah, I alluded to it just a minute ago. Most contracts have price escalation and force majeure clauses. It's stuff nobody ever looks at really, but they're there, and and that can help you if you can get it. If you're seeing that price, you're seeing your costs go up as a lab or as an OEM, that you can use those to go back to whoever you have a contract with, whether it be the OEM or a payer, that you can go back and get the money. But it's going to take time. Mm-hmm. And if the tariff is up 1 month and then it's down the next, they may push back and say, okay, yeah, you had a one-time little blip. We don't think it warrants a price increase. And you're going to go back and forth on that. So you really have to be careful because these clauses were not designed for the chaotic environment that's going on with tariffs now. Usually when a tariff's placed, it's well ahead of time, and you know what it's going to be, and you know when it's going to kick in. So you can factor that all in, and it's probably going to be there for a while because it's rare that if somebody raises a price that they're just going to drop it quickly. Usually the price stays,
and then with Medicare, you're locked.
Yeah, so Medicare is tariff proof. The CLFS is out for 2025. They're paying what they're paying. And I wouldn't hold out a lot of hope that they're magically going to increase CLFS by 145% next year. I just don't see that happening. I think the industry's kind of happy when or breathes a sigh of relief when year over year that doesn't decrease. Mm-hmm. Even if it holds pat, that's better than nothing. But it rarely even matches inflation. So those are all things as a lab you really need to be aware of.
Yeah,
because and you may have to eat the cost increase if your patient happens to be a Medicare patient that you're doing the testing for, because you have no control over your patient metrics.
Understood. Yeah, it's something to be aware of. I too shared the opinion that I came into this year thinking tariffs would be a really big issue in this industry. And at least, sometimes when people tell you something, you've got to believe it. And most of the major IVDs who aren't connected to life science, where there's a lot of cuts, are bullish that they can get around this issue. We'll go to the next slide that talks about data.
Yeah, so here, AI, mostly AI was on the agenda at EWC, less
Absolutely.
data.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was that Robert Michel threw out there was the opportunity for labs. And this is where the two meet. It's really the lab generating the data. I mean, in the way it works is it's kind of a thing. A typical doctor that orders routine lab tests actually has more AI potential than any big tech company. And that maybe people might not understand that, and I'll go into it a little bit. And of course, clinical laboratories generate 80% of objective healthcare data that's in medical records. And where did I get that from? Because I'm saying 80%. Well, I got that from Dr. Rodney Forsman at the Mayo Clinic. So when Dr. Forsman published in 1996 his thing, this is what he actually wrote. The laboratory contributes 80% of the objective data in the clinical record and influences 60 to 70% of all clinical decision making. That's his quote. It's on the slide. You'll get a copy of it. He actually put data before utilization in clinical decision making. And this was 1996, back when everything was really paper-based. And 80% is a bigger number than 70%. Here's a food for thought on this thing. 1996 was a decade before the next-gen sequencing even came about. So if you've ever used the 70% in clinical decision-making, the 80% on objective data is right there with it. And actually, it's in front of it. So doctors order, labs generate, but in reality, neither really utilize the data. And that's where the opportunity comes in for labs and even for doctors. So
I think that, yeah, one of the things you've said is that we'll get to it, but doctors could even be better utilizers than any point in the healthcare system, which might surprise folks, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah. So that's there. So yeah, so from a lab standpoint today, what can you do? If you can sell the data, as long as it's de-identified, you can sell it to a broker and they can sell it on to a pharma company or some other company using it, and you can get paid some. Or you can say, you know what, I've got all this data, I could utilize it. And to utilize it, you do have to use AI, but you don't necessarily have to do anything with the data that would be considered prescriptive. You can just trend what you're already seeing. And that is valuable, as opposed to just sending the bulk file of out for sale. And that's where I think it really becomes interesting for labs. So I'm going to break it down quickly from the doctor perspective, and then I'll show how it works for the lab. So if when you think about it, doctors order lab tests, they review the tests with their patient for their episode of care, and then they get filed away. Historically, it was paper files. Now it's in an electronic medical record. And the doctors don't revisit it. They don't have, even if they wanted to, they don't have time. So the data just sits, right? Okay, so let's think about, well, how many tests are we talking about? Well, how much data are we talking about? Okay, let's look at a typical doctor, and this is a very base scenario. If a doctor orders tests for 40 patients a week, which is about 1 per hour, times 50 weeks, because we're going to give them 2 weeks off for vacation, that's 2,000 patients. So if they're ordering some basic tests like a CBC, a CMP, a lipid panel, and a urinalysis with scope, all top 10 commonly ordered tests, that would give you about 82 results. So 82 times 2,000 is 164,000 results that the doctor's seeing. Okay. Now, they don't just see lab test results. They also have other objective data. There's vital signs. So there's up to 9 vital signs they may take. That's another 18,000 results. Plus, then they also factor comorbidities. And that altogether would become 2,000 medical decisions, which we got to at the beginning, the medical decision. And unlike large language models, they don't get to exclude anything. They have to keep everything in. So at this bottom up, if the doctor just starts to analyze using some basic AI, what's happening, trending what's happening in their patient population, that is exceptionally valuable to other companies because it has the medical decision tied to potential comorbidities with lab results and vital signs all together to give you that holistic view that is a medical decision. It's not something a language model spit out. It's an actual medical decision. And from the bottom up, it balances the top down that large language models utilize. Because right now it's all LLMs and they're going to come up with everything. No, it's you have to balance it with what the doctors are actually seeing and doing, because that gives validity to the language model. And for a lab, it's very similar to they can just trend by doctor. So think about it. If a lab, there's 500 or 1,000 doctors that they deal with every year, they're taking whatever the doctor's ordering and doing a trend by the doctor. So that's valuable too. It's not as detailed, but it has value. So those are things you can do as a doctor or a lab with AI without having to run another test.
So you
And
could,
it's not a medical device because you're just trending what's already there.
not a medical device. You're not making recommendations. It's not, yeah, it's not performing. But
So,
you could, for instance, compare doctors to
so
doctors.
that's an example of what you can do.
Yeah, could compare doctors to doctors using the data, and you could show results over time that a doctor's office may not have time to aggregate. They definitely won't have time in most cases unless they're that somewhat common entrepreneurial doctor. I always find cardiologists tend to be, in that school, but many other doctors, might be running a business, might be interesting to them. But for others, for the general population of docs, like you're talking about, there are too many patients per day to be able to be gathering this data. So the laboratory is the one with it. But the question I have, Rob, and I think many might have, is what about privacy?
Well, think about it. We actually have most of the identifiable data in this
Hmm.
thing is based around getting paid.
Hmm.
Think about it. Patient's credit card number, patient's address, patient's email, patient's phone number, all that. That's it. To do the analysis, you really only need some base information. You need year of birth. You don't need a date of birth unless you're dealing with newborns. You don't need a date of birth. You do need sex, and in some cases, you may need some other demographic information. As far as where it's going, in most cases, you can just use the state. Maybe for
Hmm.
some bigger areas like New York City or Houston and stuff like that, you may have a county. But that's really all the data you need. And so you don't need to de-identify a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're just using that base information, it's not that difficult. And you don't need a team of software engineers to calculate it for you. You really don't. And part of that, but to your point is for like doctors, they don't have time. Well, that's true. They would have to make a business decision saying, I'm going to I want to use the data. I'm going to hire somebody to take my data and put it into a form that I can then use it and I can add to it and I can trend it. Simple dashboard.
Hmm.
And oh, that then I can then determine, do I want to monetize that or not? But it's completely de-identified, and it's useful. It's actually very useful because it helps you when you think about chronic conditions. They don't happen overnight. There's a lead time to chronic conditions. So if you can go back and look 3, 5 years at what happened to your patients that now have chronic conditions, you may find something valuable clinically that can help you when you have a new patient come in and you start to get one or two longitudinal test results come in over maybe a 6 month or a year period. That's where the benefit is. So, and it's not something that a doctor would do themselves or the lab would do themselves, but it's not that difficult to incorporate to come up with a game plan to do that. And that's more than we can discuss in a webinar today, but it's something that definitely can be discussed.
Any more about AI? So AI makes this data that once was always being collected, right? We could have this
Yeah,
discussion.
the AI makes it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the data is there, so you do have to pull it out of the medical records. So you have to set up, okay, this is what I'm going to pull out, and I discussed several key points to it, and this is what I'm going to make available. But you know, or you could just de-identify the lab. You can just de-identify the medical record totally, and pretty much provide everything to a broker, and then they bit and piece it as they want to. You have no say in it. You're just going to get whatever they offer for that that tranche of data that you're sending, and maybe every year you can update it and send more. You have to make a decision. A doctor has to make a decision on their own part for their practice, and a
Mhm.
lab has to make a decision on part of their lab, unless they're part of a bigger system, and the system might make the decision for them where the lab has no say. But the
Great,
opportunity is there.
great opportunity to talk about the phrase that came out of executive work college is "you have the keys to the castle," which is not something we're used to the laboratory hearing, but it's something they should hear because things have changed, particularly with AI and the superior ability to utilize data. We did want to bring up the next slide and mention that, this is only a 30-minute or so webinar, and there's only so much you can discuss in this webinar. But we have more insights could be made available to you. And Rob, maybe you would like to talk more.
Yes. So obviously, this is as Bruce said, this is just a brief webinar. And he actually mentioned at the beginning the lab report. So the report is this global, high level, top down report that you purchase and you utilize. But then you're starting to think, well, how is it specific to my lab and what I want to do strategically? And what we can offer is uh, a more strategic review where we're, for labs or doctors' offices or companies who are looking to develop or update their strategy. And we can come in, you choose a topic, we analyze it. It's not a financial analysis, it's not a deep dive. This is that top level. Does this make sense for us and what's required? And then we review it with you and your executive team.
I mean,
And
both
a
of
couple of
us.
hours to help shape your strategy for you to make a decision. Yeah, hey, part of what I just talked to about AI. Yeah, with this deeper dive, it makes sense for us, or it doesn't make sense for us. Another area for labs, direct to consumer initiatives. Roche and LabCorp make their best margins on the DTC business, by far their best margins. There's a reason why I get emails all the time and they're offering me discounts of 20 or 30% if I'm feeling a little moody. Maybe I need to get my hormones checked. So that is there. The other thing is we can discuss is disruptive technologies that are coming, that are about to commercialize, because there are some disruptive technologies to the lab industry on both the OEM and the lab side that are going to be commercializing over the next year, and we
Yeah,
can we can speak to that, for
I,
example, among other things.
I've
But
worked in
a
I've
couple of
worked
hours with us could give you some very important insights.
I worked in market research for a couple decades, and I've always found that there's an aching for something just like this. Like, in other words, market research reports are good. There's a wide variety of providers. I even publish a few, but they're static. They're published in a time. They're designed for use by a lot of people, and so when you have individual needs as a company, you really need more explanation, and also to apply it to that. Even every month, things change a little. Look at what happened with tariffs. There was a big demand for talks and with various professionals we know of in our industry, for instance, when the tariffs were launched. How is this going to impact my business? How is this the best way what's the best way to react to this? The topic that we discussed right here would be the data insights, for instance, an opportunity for labs could be a subject of discussion. AI and IVD is another one where it's constantly changing. You might have to think about like what are the threats and opportunities for your business, and it's something that in 2 hours, those are the type of things you can accomplish. I have had in the past talks with folks who looking to get into in vitro diagnostics, and after talking for 2 hours, have decided there might be a different industry for them. That's we're it's that's a service, just like anything else, and it helps people to allocate their resources best into maybe they wanted to pursue a more med device for that company. So, but it's the kind of thing that can be more helpful sometimes than just a report. So, contact us for details on that. Rob, I want to thank you much for participating in this webinar. And I want to thank everyone who came on today. We had a pretty well attended webinar for short notice. And please contact us if we can be of further service to you. With that, we will end the webinar and thank you.